Hello everyone, thank you for coming. My name is Laurent Bugnon, and I'm going to talk to you about moving your database to Azure. It should be an interesting session, at least I hope so. I'm going to show you a few ways to move database to Azure, MongoDB to Cosmos, as well as older versions of SQL Server to SQL database. And we'll talk a little bit about our data offering, of course, and also this new database migration service, which can be used to move the data to Azure in a managed manner. So it's a nice tool. So what we say, and maybe for those of you who have been in Jay Gordon's session, which was just before this one, it's part of our learning path. I don't know how many people were there. Can you raise your hand? Yeah, that's cool. So basically, we have this new concept of learning paths, right? And we have this learning path here, which is migrating to Azure. And Jay already migrated the application services and talked a little bit about the database. But here we are going to assume that the databases are on-premise, and then we are going to move them to Azure. And so if you have not seen Jay's session, don't worry about it, right? It can be taken as a totally separate session. But we try to have a little bit of continuity. So you might have heard Jay tell you that moving data is a little bit like moving puppies from one room to the other, right? You think, how hard can it be? And then you end up with puppies all over the place, and and then you have to clean up, right? So hopefully we will provide you some tools which will make it easier, and you won't have to clean up as much. Good. So I think one thing which is important to know and to understand is that it's really a great time to move data to Azure for multiple reasons. First of all, we have additional data offerings that we didn't have before, which makes the migration easier. Like, for example, we have this new offering called SQL Database Managed Instance, and you'll hear me talk more about it in this session, which is highly compatible even with very, very old SQL Server, even 2005, okay? So it's great because it means that you can do the migration without having to worry about upgrading your on-premise database first, or maybe removing some of the features that you have. And the compatibility is almost at 100%, so you have a good security here. But also we have new tools for the migration. For example, this database migration service, which are going to help you do that in a managed manner. So this is a nice thing. You have always different reasons to migrate. And I think one reason could be that your data center contracts are expiring soon. So it's a good time to think about what should I do next, okay? Am I continuing with on-premise data center, or maybe I have a third-party provider? Or do I want to try the cloud? That could be an idea. Or maybe you have acquired a firm, or you have been acquired by a firm, and suddenly you have hybrid data architectures, and then you need to integrate that. And so on Azure, we have different platforms, we have different OS, we have different server types, and we also have messaging services between those if needed so that they can communicate. So integrating hybrid data architectures is quite easy. As well, I should say, as creating hybrid data scenarios where you have some of your data on your premise and some of your data in the cloud so that you can migrate gradually, for example. That's totally something which is supported. Maybe you have some capacity needs. Maybe you're doing well in your firm and suddenly you have a peak demand. And so the cool thing is that if you go on Azure, we are scaling up, but we're also scaling down. And so you don't pay for things that you don't use. While on the other hand, if you buy a data server and put it under your desk, of course, if this data server is not used, you're going to waste some money because the data server is not used. Software and hardware refresh, okay, we always keep you patched, up to date with the latest security updates and the latest critical updates, as well as hardware. Basically, if something breaks, we'll replace it. It's not your problem. You don't have to worry about that. Also, the good thing is that since the data is redundant always in Azure, we always have at least 3 replicas. We are going to just fail over to another data server if one data server would fail, and then you have a big security. Your users basically don't even notice anything, okay? Security threats. Security is super important and probably even more important than ever. Okay, we keep hearing some leaks and some things happening. And so if you put your data on Azure, first of all, it's going to be encrypted at rest always. So we always have strong encryption on that. It's also very easy, and in fact, it's always encrypted by default during transport. If you want to use your own keys, it's very easy to configure add your own certificates. And also, the data center is secure by default. I don't know if you have seen those data centers, but those are very, very secure. It's hard to enter. And in fact, most of the time, there is literally nobody on the floor, okay? They only go on the floor when they have to physically replace something, which is rare. So most of the time, it's absolutely secure. Nobody is going to come and steal a data server like they could, in your office. Compliance, Azure is compliant with all major organizations, including, of course, in Europe, where we have different compliance than in the US, so that is a given. As well as application innovation, we have a lot of offerings, such as, for example, serverless applications, where you can create very easily a function running serverlessly in the cloud, which can react every time that something changes in your database. For example, that can be an interesting scenario. Maybe you want to run some of our AI models on your data. Maybe you want to use Power BI to create reports, etc. So you have a nice way to integrate additional services to create great applications to utilize your data. And finally, software end of support. Of course, now we are already in 2019, time flies, and so certain products reach end of support. For example, Windows Server and SQL Server. July is very soon. So think about it. It might be a good reason to migrate. It might be a good reason to upgrade to something else. And so I just want to mention this offer, which is interesting. That's in the case where you migrate to infrastructure as a service. So where you do a VM and then you put this VM on Azure, we would, in that case, extend the security update for 3 additional years after end of support. However, think about it, in 3 years, you'll still have the same problem, right? What do I do now? So it might be a good idea to actually think about migrating to platform as a service instead, where those things are managed and directly integrated in the service. But I wanted to mention that anyway, just so you hear about it. Good, so we have different capabilities. If you think about the migration, a good place to start is Azure Migrate. It's azure.com/migrate or /migration. And this is basically everything migration to Azure, not just for database, but also virtual machines, maybe some websites, application services, etc., etc. So you're going to be advised on how to do that. We have, of course, Azure Site Recovery, so you can do a backup and restore. It's kind of the old school way of doing a migration, okay? But we do have also some managed services like the Azure Database Migration Service. I'll mention it a few more times in the session, and then we'll see a live demo. Also, in terms of application services, we have some innovations. For example, we support now Java and Tomcat Azure application services if you want to create a website using those technologies. We have Kubernetes if you want to orchestrate your containers. We have Red Hat. On the database side, we have an offer now where you can put PostgreSQL and MySQL database in Azure database. So it's a nice way to take those open source, very popular database systems and then run them on Azure with the additional advantages that you have in the cloud, such as higher availability, maybe the security and the reliability. We have this Azure SQL Database Managed Instance. I'll come back to that later. And then we also support NoSQL solutions, for example, with Cassandra and MongoDB APIs, which you can run on Cosmos DB. And I'll talk more about that later as well. Okay, so this is a nice migration path as well. So again, when you do the assessment, in this demo, we'll talk about the Data Migration Assistant. I'll do you a demo a little bit later. This is a nice tool that you can install on your machine. It's an application. You point it to your database, to your SQL database, I should say. Then it's going to assess the migration. It's going to tell you if it detects some feature parity issues. For example, you are using something which is incompatible. And like this, that gives you a good peace of mind before you even start the migration. That's totally not invasive, so it's just going to assess. For the migration, I already mentioned that. Azure Data Box, I'll show you a slide. And then, of course, because it's platform as a service, you can also optimize your data architecture later. For example, by optimizing the cost, okay, we are going to give you some information about the cost. It's very transparent, but we also give you some recommendation. For example, if we see that you have a box with many CPUs and some of those CPUs are not used, we are going to tell you, well, you might want to save some money by downgrading this box to a smaller version, for example. Security and management, super important, okay? I mentioned yesterday in my introduction to data sessions that everything's encrypted, always by default, but we also have some sessions in here, as well as a lot of courses online where you can learn how to secure and manage your data. That's, of course, important to take care of that. And so we also embrace ISV solutions. So many of you are using third-party tools, and even though we do have equivalent for those tools very often, we do embrace that. We understand that it's important for you to use the tools that you are comfortable with. And so gradually we are starting to surface those third-party tools inside the portal, which means that you can use third-party ISV solutions to manage your Azure databases. And I hope that you appreciate that. We really partner with those people to do that. Good, so we have different migration paths. I already mentioned SQL Server, all the way down to 2005. Now that we have SQL Database Managed Instance, so we have higher compatibilities than ever before. MySQL, PostgreSQL, Mongo, we have also other NoSQL paths, and this is supported by the Database Migration Service. And then you have, after that, different targets that you can choose from, Azure SQL Database, or Database Managed Instance for everything SQL. You can select Azure Database for MySQL and Postgres. You can select Cosmos for Mongo. I'll show you a demo. It's a cool tool. And we also announce, Database Managed Instance, I already mentioned it, but we also have this new offering called Azure SQL Database Hyperscale. Now, this one is interesting because it offers you some very fast auto-scale up to hundreds of terabytes per database. So if you have big data, you may consider that option. Other options include SQL Data Warehouse, for example, where we support up to petabytes of data, as well as massive parallel processing of the data. So basically, you have quite a lot of choice depending on what you do with the data and depending where the data comes from, if you have really high volume of data. Now, the data box, I already mentioned it. So this is a very funny and interesting, at least I think it's funny, interesting way to migrate data. And it's actually very useful if you think about it, because if you have large amounts of data, maybe the internet is just not fast enough, or maybe it's just not secure enough if the data is very critical. And so you have the possibility to go and create a resource in the portal, select the Azure Data Box, and then it's going to give you the choice between the small version, the gateway, the 100 terabyte, which is the default, or the 1 petabyte. We are physically delivering you one of those boxes. You can place the data on it. It's encrypted on the box, and then we ship it back to the data center, and our engineers are going to migrate the data for you. So it can be a good option in case you don't want to rely on a wire to do the transfer. Okay, so you might have heard about Tailwind Traders a few times during this tour. And of course, I suppose that you all heard about Northwind, right? Northwind is, it's a very venerable institution. They are the king of data, or at least they used to be. And it was really an old school firm. So they have data centers on their premise, and they had also a very hybrid architecture because this has basically grown gradually and historically over the years. And so when they got acquired by Tailwind, of course, Tailwind is a very modern firm, okay? They want to move everything to the cloud. They want to have everything online, but in a very managed way. And so they decided, okay, let's migrate that. So we are going to talk about that. We have a rich catalog that we need to migrate. Personally, I like the incredible frozen chair, which today it's a little bit cold for that, but I mean, the summer is coming, so I think it's a really cool option. So let's see how we can migrate that. And first of all, let's talk about the architecture. So like I said, my colleague Jay already moved the application services, the websites, to Azure. So now we have an architecture which is hybrid, where we have some things in Azure and some things on-premise. And one of the application services we have is a Node.js website, web service, I should say. Oops, sorry about that, technical issue. All right, so we have this Node.js service, which is a product service. It is delivering the product description, all right? And this Node.js service is in Azure now. It's going to talk to a VM which is on our premise. And in this VM, we run a MongoDB instance, and this is a database which contains the product description. So that's the first part. And then the second part is an ASP.NET web service again. And this one, again, was grown basically historically. Somebody said, oh, we should do that in ASP.NET. Why not? And this one is talking to another VM, which is also on our premise, which is running SQL Server 2012, so a relatively old version of SQL Server. And this is our inventory service. This is where we have the numbers, what we have in stock. And those numbers are quite critical. We want to make sure that nobody tampers with those, okay? And then we have a third website, which is a static website, which is basically the front end. It's a client-side JavaScript and CSS and HTML talking to that. So now we want to move that to Azure. How do we do? First of all, we'll talk about the MongoDB, and we will migrate that to a Cosmos DB with the Mongo APIs. And here we have the advantage that because we are using the Mongo APIs, we can do the migration without touching our application. And you'll see that it's as easy as switching the connection string. But we get all the advantages of Cosmos, for example, the global replication and, of course, the very low latency. And then the SQL Server, we are going to move that to an SQL Managed Instance. We decided to go with this premium offering because we want our data to be totally secure. And of course, SQL Managed Instance is a fully private database. It runs in a virtual network, and it has only private IP addresses, no public at all. So if you want to log into that, you can use VPN, ExpressRoute, etc. And you have high security. Also, it's very highly compatible, even with our fairly old version of SQL Server. It's even compatible with SQL 2005. Good, so let's talk about that. We are going to do that using certain tools. And you know, a lot of people love the portal. I think the portal is great. A lot of people love Visual Studio as a tool. But of course, a lot of DBAs love the command line. And we do have multiple offerings for that. Of course, PowerShell. We also support Bash on Linux and Mac. We even support Bash on Windows, and you'll see me using that in Windows. But for those of you who are maybe on a laptop where you don't have your tools installed, you can also always use a Cloud Shell. Now, that's a great tool that we have directly in the portal. So if you click on this button here in the web portal, in the Azure portal, it's going to open a new window. And this window, you can select Bash or PowerShell, and you can run your script and manage your Azure properties directly from there. There is even a file system associated to that. So you can, for example, do a Git clone if you want, and even build stuff directly on in the cloud. And you can also install, of course, your tools. A lot of tools are already pre-installed, for example, the Azure CLI. But you can also install your own tools if you want, and those are preserved across sessions, so it's quite convenient. You can select Bash or PowerShell, depending what you prefer, so it's very nice. So I'll show you that, and then we'll do the rest of the demo using the Windows Subsystem for Linux. So it's a feature that you turn on in Windows 10. And then after that, you can go to the Microsoft Store and download a version of Linux that you prefer. In my case, I'm going to use Ubuntu 18.04. And this is running directly on Windows. It's not a simulation, it's actually Linux on Windows. And so that allows me to use Bash to manage my instances. But of course, everything I'm showing you, I could do it in PowerShell as well, as you would imagine. Good, so the first demo I want to do is create the Cosmos DB instance. And this we are going to do in the portal using the Cloud Shell, just so you see it run once. So I'm going to go here in Cloud Shell. It's going to start a session. It just takes a few seconds to connect. Here I could go and switch to PowerShell if I wanted to. Here I have access I can upload and download some files, but I can even actually open a file share directly in the portal or connect to it using SMB, for example, through Windows Explorer. So now I am inside my Cloud Shell, and what I'm going to do, I'm going to go to my script, and as you can see, I am selecting here, I'm setting a few instances, a few variables. For example, the resource group, this is going to be the group of the resource that I'm going to use. So in that case, I'm just going to have Cosmos DB, but later I might add maybe a website or maybe a virtual machine. So I'm going to take that and did I actually copy here? I'm going to paste that here. And then after that, I'm going to make sure that I'm using the correct subscription. So I say set the subscription to Ignite the tour. And then I'm going to create the resource group. So I do AZ group create. Just takes a few seconds. And then now the group is created. And so if I go now in my resource groups here and filter to S2, here I have a new resource group which was just created, okay? And right now it is empty. Let's go back to the console. And so now I'm going to start the creation of the Cosmos DB instance. So I'm going to start it, and then I'll run you quickly through what's happening here. So what I'm doing here is I'm doing AZ, which is our Azure CLI, Cosmos DB create, okay? With the resource group I specified, the name of the account I specified, and I say the kind is going to be MongoDB. We have different APIs. We'll talk about that in the next few slides. And then I set the location to Eastern US. I could here already at creation specify multiple locations for read and for write. And then I say the default consistency level is consistent DB prefix. We support 5 different consistency levels, and those consistency levels govern how the data is replicated between the different locations. I'll show you that in the portal in a moment. And then I set the write location, multiple write location to true, which means that I am supporting here multiple read, but also multiple write locations. And so this way I can reduce the latency on read and on write. So this is going to take a few minutes to create. Right now, if I refresh my group here, you see that I have my Cosmos DB account created, and right now it is saying creating, so it's not quite ready yet. So let's go back to the slides. And what we are going to do here is talk about Cosmos DB. So Cosmos DB is this globally distributed database service that we have. And SQL Server can be also distributed because you can create some geo-redundancy. But here I would say Cosmos DB has been thought really from scratch, from the start, with geo-replication in mind. So the way that the data is replicated is very efficient, and it is absolutely automatic. What we also support here is a multi-API model. And so we support things like MongoDB, SQL, table storage, Gremlin, Spark, and Cassandra, okay? More coming, which means that it's great for a lift and shift. If you have an existing database on your premise, like Mongo, for example, you can migrate it to Cosmos, take advantage of the new features in Cosmos, but your applications are just going to continue working because this is the same APIs. So we support different models, for example, key value, column family, document DB, graph DB. We have the global distribution. It's going to scale up and down extremely fast within seconds. So if we see that you need more capacity, more bandwidth, more RAM, more nodes or whatever, we are going to just scale up. But then after that, we also scale down so that you don't pay for things that you don't use. We guarantee low latency. We have some service level agreements in place that guarantees that if we don't fulfill our promise, you'll get some money back. And we have those 5 consistency models that I mentioned already. We support all those APIs, more coming soon. So it's a pretty exciting offering that we have here. Good, so if you want to know more about Cosmos DB, you can go to our microsoft.com/learn. And here we have some courses about NoSQL data with Cosmos DB. Microsoft.com/learn is an interesting new resource that we have. It's where we group now all of our learning experience gradually. And here you have the possibility to earn some points, to get assessed, to get certified. And then you can show off to your boss and say, look, I did something, right? So I deserve a raise or something. Well, yeah, who doesn't, right? Cool. So in order to do the Mongo to Cosmos DB migration, we could use the Azure Database Migration Service because it actually supports Mongo to Cosmos. And I'll show you later how it looks like. But here I decided to use the native Mongo tools because I know a lot of people who work with Mongo love those tools. And so I just want to show you that because we use the Mongo APIs, you can actually use those tools as well. And so we are going to do a dump first. So we are going to SSH into the virtual machine, which is hosting the MongoDB, the Mongo database. And then we are going to do a dump. And we are going to do that in Ubuntu on Windows. So this is how it's going to look like. And then later we'll do a restore. And so for the restore, we'll first change into the folder. For the restore, we'll need a little bit information from the Cosmos DB database, the host name, where is it running. We'll need the user and password. And then the rest is just some configuration for speed. I have multiple workers per collection, etc., just to go a little bit faster. So let's see how we do that. So first of all, I'm going to go back to my portal and I'm going to check if my database is online, and I can see that it is online right now, so it's perfect, it's ready. So let's do the migration, and then after that I'll show you a little bit more about the Cosmos DB. You'll see that right now it is completely empty, so if I browse the collections here, I have nothing, no database detected or selected, okay, no collections found. So let's change that and let's add something. Good, so first of all, I'm going to go into my machine. So I'm going to SSH into the machine. And to do that, I'm going to go here into, let's do a clear again, okay? I'm going to do this into Ubuntu running on Windows on the Windows subsystem for Linux. So I'm logging into the machine, and now you see that it says Azure user at MongoDB1. So I am SSH into my virtual machine. And so now I have the possibility to do a dump, all right? And so now if I do ls, you see that I have a dump folder. I can change to this dump folder. Now I have Tailwind, which is the name of my collection. And if I do ls again, you see that now I have inventory.bson, which is a binary JSON file with the content of the database. And then I have the metadata, which is in JSON format. Good, so now I need to prepare my script for the restore. So I need the host. How do I find that? Let's go back to our Cosmos DB account. And if I click on connection string, this is where I have everything I need. So here I have the host name. Okay, I'm going to paste that here. Then I need the username, which is here. The port is 10255, which is a default. So I don't need to do anything. And then I'm going to take the password and paste that here. So now my script is ready. I can copy that and put this in my database. And basically, it's going to just run. It takes a few seconds for the data to be copied. This is a relatively small database, so it's quite fast. Now I'm done. So now I can go back to my overview here. And if I refresh this, you will see that at this point, now we have a collection. So the migration has been successful. Good, so now I need to switch my website to use a new database. Okay, so how do I do that? Well, I can go again in the connection string. And here I have the primary connection string. I'm going to copy that. And I'm going to go here into my product service. So this is a Node.js website that I mentioned before, okay? And if I go down to application settings, I have my connection string, which is saved here as a setting. And so if you check here what we have, it's a little bit small, the box, but basically I have just the IP address of my VM, okay? This is the old connection string. So I'm going to replace with what I just copied. And now I'm actually addressing this Cosmos DB account. But what's interesting is that I'm still using the MongoDB protocol. So I'm using the MongoDB APIs, okay? Let's save that. And now how can I actually, this is my website. How can I actually prove that I'm using the new services? Well, now this is coming from the old database. I have my 500 services, my 500 items here. So why don't we add a new item? So I can go here to my Cosmos DB. Let's go into Data Explorer. And in the Data Explorer, I can directly see what's happening in my DB. I could also use the application called Azure Storage Explorer to do that if I want to connect in a little bit more comfortable manner. But I can do that directly in the portal here. So now I have all my documents. You see that this is document DB. The documents are in JSON format. Okay, that's the way that Mongo does things. And I can go and add a new document here. And then I prepared a new article here. So you see it says this is a test article at $999 supplied by Azure Advocates. Let's copy that. I'm going to paste that here, save this. And when it's saved, I can go back to my website. I'm going to refresh. And now if I go all the way down, I see my new article. And you see that it is indeed the new article that I created. So basically, my website is now pointing to my new database, and everything runs as expected. Good, so let's take a quick look into this Cosmos DB, a little bit more information. So in the overview, you always have the most important information. You can also see a little bit information about your database, including here the region configuration. And as you see, right now I have only one location. Remember, I specified East US as a primary. And this is making me a little bit uneasy because if something should happen to this data center, basically my application doesn't work anymore. So let's change that. I can easily go into replicate data globally. And I'm going to start putting some locations elsewhere. So I want to put one in Western US because for our friends in Seattle, and we have tons of MVPs in Seattle right now. I don't know if you heard. So they also want to access the database, right? In a fast manner, I should say. Let's put one in Western Europe because let's face it, that's where we are. and then I'm going to go, so we have new data centers in South Africa, if you heard. We're the first major offering in Africa, which is really cool. So for our South African friends, I think we can reduce the latency for them. Australia, Singapore, Hong Kong, etc. Once I'm done, I can say save, and now it starts the replication process. Now, in my application, I don't need to do anything because the connection string is actually pointing to a load balancer, and this load balancer is going to know when the data is ready. It's going to automatically select the location which is the closest to the user in order to reduce the latency, okay? So right now it's updating. Now the consistency, I told you about those 5 different consistency models. Right now we selected consistent prefix, but we have 5 different styles. And depending what you want to do, you can select here, and you see we have this small video which explains how it's working, so you can check it out. Basically, it governs how the data is replicated. Sometimes you want to have a write, which is when the write returns, you know that the data is already available everywhere in the world. And so that would be one consistency model. But sometimes you want the write to finish as fast as possible, and you're okay if the data is not immediately replicated. You're okay waiting a few more milliseconds until everything is done. So you can choose out of those 5. Few other things you can do here is browse the collection, like I showed you. But also very interesting, we have here the metrics. And so the metrics is very important. This is the health of your database if you want. It tells you what's going on with your database. And right now you see that I have my 2 regions. I have the main one, which is Eastern US, where all the traffic is going at the moment. And here I have this one in Western US, which is starting to be created. It's not finished yet. It's going to take a while. But basically it is starting. Even Chile, I will have my replicas all around the world. Now here we have the latency information. And as you can see, we are showing you what we guarantee. So the SLA, the service level agreement, we guarantee below 10 milliseconds for reads, but we also guarantee below 10 milliseconds for writes. And right now for the read, we are around 2 milliseconds. Typically it's between 1 and 2 milliseconds. And for the write, we are between 5 and 6 milliseconds. So that's okay. If we should exceed those values and be slower than what we promise, you let us know and we give you some money back. Good, another interesting metric, availability. So we guarantee, as you can see here, we guarantee 99.999%, which is literally a few seconds per month where the database may be off. And right now we are at 100%, which is great. And I really hope that someday we'll go to 100.002. You know, crossing fingers, right? Cool, so that's what we have. So interesting to check those metrics. Make sure to check them out. This is really the health of your database. And right now we're okay. But I don't know if you notice, I did something which is not very good, right? I started doing my dump, then I talked to you a little bit more, and then I did the restore, and then I talked to you more, and then I switched my connection string. And all the time, my website was still active. It was talking to the old database. So basically, I may have data inconsistency at this point, which is why you don't want to do that. Normally, you should switch your website off, do the migration, and then switch it on again. And then for this period of time, you have an annoying page telling your users, sorry, but we're not available. And then you lose some business. So in the database migration service, which I'm going to demonstrate just later, you'll see that we have an online mode. And that's really guaranteeing a minimum downtime. Basically, we are going to keep the database consistent during all the time that the database migration service is running. So you can migrate your data. You can try your new data with a test environment, make sure that everything's running. All the time the data is kept synchronized. And then when you're ready and confident, you can switch your connection string, and then you can stop the database migration service. So it's an online migration mode, which is very, very convenient. I'll show you that in a second. Good, so let's talk a little bit about migration, assessments, and all that. So when you do a migration, you typically have those 3 phases: assessing the migration, so that you know if it's going to work or not. Then you do the migration, and then you can optimize. So right now, I want to concentrate on the assessment, and then in the next demo, we are going to start the migration, and then we'll talk about the target, which is our SQL database managed instance. So in order to assess the migration, we have some tools. For example, the Data Migration Assistant. And this is a tool that you install. So here I'm on Windows. I'm just going to start it. And this tool is very, very convenient because it's giving you peace of mind. So here I'm going to create a new project. Let's call that Tailwind. And here I have the different sources. At the moment, we support SQL Server as a source, but we support here multiple targets. For example, Azure SQL Database, which is our classic SQL database in the cloud. We have Azure SQL Database Managed Instance, which is this new offering that we have, which is highly compatible. And then we have even SQL Server on Azure Virtual Machine, so that's more the IaaS offering, or even SQL Server on-premise if you want to do a migration on your premise. Good, so in that case, I'm going to select Azure SQL Database Managed Instance. I'm going to create, and then you see that I'm going to check for database compatibility, feature parity, and we keep adding new features to that tool so you can check it out as you go to make sure that your migration is going to work fine. Good, I need to specify the name of my source server. So in that case, the server is running on a virtual machine. So I have an IP address, which is here. All right. I'm going to use SQL Server authentication. My username is super secret and very clever, as you can see. And then I'm going to have here a password. Let's connect to the database. Next, I can select the database I want to access. In that case, I have just one database, which is a Tailwind database. Let's select that. And then I'm going to start the assessment. This database is fairly small, so it's going to go fast. And then I see that I can do the migration without any issues, feature parity, no problems. So maybe you can start with Azure SQL Database. If it doesn't work, it's going to give you some information about what doesn't work, what feature are you using which are not compatible, and give you some recommendation on how you can actually change that. Good, so here I am really happy. I have peace of mind. So I'm going to start the migration. And so in order to start the migration, I'm going to use the database migration service, which is a resource on Azure that you create just like any other using the create a resource button, okay? Or you can also create it using command line interaction, of course. And here I'm going to migrate to this SQL database managed instance. Now this one is the one which is fully private. You see that it is running in a virtual network. It has only private IPs, okay? But I can migrate to that nonetheless. I'm going to start the migration, and then we'll talk about SQL Database Managed Instance. I'll show you some features so that we can understand better what's happening. Good. So this database migration service is running, but right now I don't have any project. I'm going to create one, and I'm going to name it. Let's name that Tailwind Migration. And here you see that I can select where I want to migrate from. So we have SQL Server, but we also have AWS, so SQL Server running on AWS, PostgreSQL running on AWS, we have PostgreSQL, MySQL running on-premise, AWS for MySQL, we have MongoDB. If you select MongoDB, the target will be Cosmos DB. So that would be the equivalent that I did before with the Mongo tools, except that here we would use the database migration service to do it, okay? And then I have here even Oracle, which would migrate to an Azure database for Postgres. No, actually, we have different offerings. You can also select Azure SQL Database, Azure SQL Data Warehouse, etc. So it's a way to get out of Oracle and into Azure if you want to. If you want to. Good. So SQL Server, and here I'm going to migrate to Azure SQL Database Managed Instance, okay? And then I have the type of migration, and if I click here, you see that I have multiple choices. I have online or offline, and so the online data migration would be this migration that I mentioned before with minimum downtime. You can basically let your website, your applications running, do the migration, and then when you're ready, when you're comfortable, you switch, and then you switch the DMS off, which means that the data is kept synchronized. Now in this demo, I'm going to use the offline data migration just because it is faster. Okay, I don't want to spend too much time just waiting for the migration to complete, but if you want to try it at home, feel free to try the online data migration. Good. Okay, so I'm going to save that, and then I'm going to create the activity. And so I will need, of course, to enter some information about the source and the target. So the source one is the same as before, the one that I just assessed. It is my on-premise database. I'm going to select SQL authentication, username, and then the password. All right. I'm going to save, and so what it is going to do now, it's going to connect to the source, check that it has actually access to what it needs, and then we are going to select the target, and so the target is going to be our managed instance, so I need the host name for that, and the host name is available here in the overview. I can just copy that. Here we go. I'm also going to log in with SQL authentication. The username is actually the same username, and the password is also the same password. Then I'm going to select the database I want to migrate. You saw before in the assessment, I only have one database, so we are going to take this one. Here we go, Tailwind. I'm not going to migrate logins because I already have one login and that's enough. And then I need to select the backups because, of course, you want to make sure that you create backups during the migration, or before the migration, I should say, just to be sure. So here I will let Azure Database Migration Service create the backups, and I'm going to provide the address of a share where the DMS can copy the backup files. Of course, I need to give a username and password for this share. So basically, the DMS is going to impersonate that user. All right, this is a password. And then I need a public URI for a blob container, and this blob container is going to be used to save some temporary files. You have some information here on how to do that. So here I have a URL that I can paste, all right? I have a little bit more settings here. For example, I could change the name of the database if I wanted to. Here in that case, I'm going to leave it like that. Now I'm saving that. It's going to assess everything, make sure that it has access to the storage location so that it can create the backup. And then when it's done, it's going to tell me everything's fine. Let's give a name to the activity. And then one last thing I need to say, I need to configure the validation options. Now, if I validate my database, it's going to take a little bit longer. You want to do that when you migrate in production, okay? In that case, I'm not going to validate just to go a little bit faster, but basically, that's something you would want to do. I'm going to run the migration now. So now it's going to show me this dialog. If I refresh, you see that I have one which is in progress. And this one, if I click here, it's going to tell me that I have one database restoring. It's a small DB, okay, but still it's going to work. Of course, if it was a bigger DB, it would take more time. Good, so let's give it a little bit time and talk about SQL Database Managed Instance, and then we'll come back to that to see how it worked. So SQL Database Managed Instance, like I said, this is a new offering, right? Everything I did here, you could do it with Azure SQL Database, the classic way. But Azure SQL Managed Instance has a few advantages. First of all, good to know, it's available, generally available from October 1st last year. So it is ready for the enterprise. You can absolutely use it. And this is an offering which is going to make your migration life easier. So just before I was talking to a gentleman who said he has an SQL Server 2005. Well, that's okay because we have almost 100% compatibility, even with those old versions of SQL Server. And we even support things like cross-database joins. For example, if you have some compiled CLR, some compiled .NET code running on your machine, if you have some very special stored procedures, we can migrate that, okay? So like I said, almost 100% compatibility. Also, it's a fully managed service, so you don't need to migrate to a VM, which is, of course, better because it's going to optimize your resources. Also, we have all those intelligent services that run on the service. And so if we go back to these migration phases, in the migrate phase, normally you're going to rehost your data, you're going to copy the data, and then you need to refactor your application a little bit, for example, at least switching the connection string. But sometimes you even have to re-architect your data architecture and maybe even rebuild the whole thing because you have incompatibilities or something is not working fine. So here with SQL Database Managed Instance, you can really concentrate on migration, but then you eliminate pretty much the need to re-architect or to rebuild. Also, because it's a platform as a service offering, in the optimization phase, actually during the migration or after the migration, you can optimize, for example, your cost management. You can make sure that you are configuring your server, according to what you actually need. Like I said, we are going to send you sometimes recommendation if we say, oh, this server has, for example, 32 cores and you're only using 16. Why don't we downgrade you to something cheaper? We have also intelligent security assessment. So we have some AIs that you can configure to run on your data. And then we detect SQL injections. For example, we detect unusual logins, these kind of things. I'll show you later. Those are all offerings where, of course, virtual machines fall short. And that's why it could be interesting to have a platform as a service instead. So really, what is SQL Database Managed Instance? Well, it's another flavor of Azure SQL Database if you want, okay? It is running using the same infrastructure, so it is also a PaaS offering. It's using the same tools, SQL Server Management Studio, Visual Studio, or any other SQL tool. But in addition to Azure SQL Database, it's going to provide you with increased compatibility, okay? So you don't need to refactor your database before the migration. And also higher security. It is fully isolated. We understand that for certain enterprises, there is a need for fully secure data, fully private data. And so the database managed instance doesn't have any public IP. You can log into it using ExpressRoute, VPN connectivity. And basically, if you have an application service, for example, it will run on the same virtual network. And then you can open a port in the application service so that your users can actually, interact with the data, but at least they cannot interact directly with the database. So it's a very secure offering. It's more expensive than Azure SQL Database. First of all, it's a new offering, but also it has those additional security features and compatibility features. But the pricing is transparent. It is frictionless and competitive. You can very easily scale up, scale down using the portal. I'll show you that in a moment. And you see always what you're going to pay. Good, so basically it means that you have peace of mind, okay? It's a managed service, which means that we have full stack updates and patches. We're always going to make sure that you have the latest patches. You have the scaling up, scaling down, which are very fast. We also offer backups with health check, and you can configure the retention time from 7 to 30 days. We have 99.99% availability, and you can configure a secondary geo-replica. Coming soon, we're also going to offer multiple geo-replicas with automatic failover. So if one server would melt for some reason, and I'm not joking, this happened to us in Houston last year because it was very hot and then we had electricity breakdown. Well, in that case, no problem. We are just going to fail over to another data center and you're safe, okay? So that's pretty cool. And then also, of course, what it's going to offer you is those services that I mentioned before, such as intelligent query processing. So basically what it does is that it's going to analyze your queries. And if we see that you have a long-running query, we are going to check if we can make it faster. And we may even offer you some solutions to that. Threat detection, I mentioned that before. So basically, it's a nice peace of mind offering that we have. If you want to know more about relational data in Azure, another Learn alert, and so that will be with SQL data, and you can go to microsoft.com/learn at this URL, and by the way, I'll show you where you can get the slides at the end. Good, so let's see the demo. So the first thing I want to do, I'm going to check if the migration is actually working. So let's go back to our portal, and I'm going to refresh. And now you see that the migration is complete, so that's cool, which means that my data is available. So if I go back into SQL Database Managed Instance, I will have another instance. I already had one database before, but now I have another one here, which is my Tailwind, which is good. Now, I did here an offline migration just to go faster, but imagine that I'm doing the online migration, okay, just for the purpose of the demo. I could totally take my time at this point because the DMS is still running. So it's still going to keep the database synchronized. Okay, so I have really peace of mind. I could run a staging environment of my website on my new database, make sure that everything's running, really do take care of that before I do the switch to the new website, to the new database, sorry. So here in my website, I'm still using the old database at this point. You see it says Microsoft SQL Server 2012. This is the connection string. So I'm here using TCP to this IP address, which is my virtual machine. So now I need to switch the connection string. And this is a little bit more involved than before. Before, I just went into the portal, I switched the connection string, I saved, and I was done. But now remember that this is a very secure box, okay? So I made that because I wanted to make sure that nobody tampers with my inventory numbers. I want to make sure that this is fully secure. I only have private IPs, which means that my website, in order to connect to the database, is going to have to run on the same virtual network, okay? So when we did the migration of the application service, we actually did that. And the way we did that is that we containerized our application service in Docker, and then we put this Docker container on the same virtual network, and then we opened a public port in the application service but we don't have any public port on the database. Does that make sense? Cool. So in order to switch the connection string, I will run a script. I'm just going to log into the Docker, change the connection string, and log off. Super easy. So I'm going to go here to my script. So as you see, this is a script which is logging into the Docker. I'm going to just say replace the connection string with this new connection string called mi, which is my managed instance. And basically, the Docker container is going to do the change. So let's go back here to Ubuntu. Here, I'm still into my MongoDB, so I will exit so that I am on my environment again. And I'm going to copy that. I just need to log in. Voila, now it's logging into the Docker, changing the connection string, and everything should be done. And now if I refresh, you will see that I'm using my new database, running Microsoft SQL Azure. It was patched on the 18th March 2019. So basically the patch was played like just 2 days ago, right, I think, or 3 days. I'm not sure what date we are, sorry. And basically it means that I have released the latest security patches. I have peace of mind. I didn't have to do anything for that. It just comes automatically, all right? And on the other hand, the database is still the same. I can still go and interact with my data. And so at this point, I have peace of mind. Everything's working. I could switch my database migration service off and be done. Okay? Good. So the demo worked. That's great. Let's go back to the slides. I have just a little bit more information. So first of all, once you are done with the migration, might be a good time to think about your application. So we have also quite a lot of offerings which can help you create new applications. For example, Azure Container Instance or Azure Kubernetes Services, where you can orchestrate your containers. You could do an Azure Service Fabric, right? Create some services very easily. We have, of course, Azure App Service, where you can create new websites. In our case, our Node.js and ASP.NET are already running on App Service, so that's great. And also, you can now optimize your resources. So we have this website called the Cost Management, Azure Cost Management. And this is where you can see exactly what you consume. You can see what you can optimize. Maybe you selected, an SQL Server which is too big. So maybe you can scale it down, and you can do that. I just want to spend a couple of minutes also to show you this SQL Database Managed Instance. So let's go here. Now, this is the database, the managed instance in the portal. And you have a few things which are interesting. First of all, if you are not sure how to get started, you can always click on Quick Start, and then you'll have some information. Here you see that we tell you how to connect how to create the virtual machine using SSMS, but we also show you how to connect to it using RDP, etc. We have all the connection strings that you need here, ADO.NET, JDBC, ODBC, PHP. And then we have the pricing tier. So like I told you, this is more expensive than Azure SQL Database, okay? But this is justified because it's an enterprise offering with increased security, increased compatibility. Also, this pricing is totally transparent. So if you say, okay, I need more cores, for example, you try and then you see immediately how much you're going to pay. You can also decide to have more storage, okay? And so you see immediately what's going to happen here. Now this button, I want to make you sensitive to that. It is our save money button, right? This is a button that our accountants hate and we love. So basically, if you press here, it's going to tell you how much you can save simply by using your already existing SQL licenses, because you may already have SQL Server licenses on site, on premise, okay? Well, you can leverage those into the cloud, and then you can save up to 55%. So don't forget to click on the button, okay? It's a good idea, I think. Good, and then of course we have the data security, so I already mentioned that. So here you can go here for an additional $15 a month, you can turn it on. And then what it's going to do, it's going to run some periodic scans, but also it's going to have the AI continuously checking what's going on. And then it can send you some email in case it detects something weird. For example, SQL injection, different vulnerabilities, data exfiltration, unsafe actions, or unusual client login. I actually cannot say this word, so I'm saying unusual instead. So basically, this is an AI which is running all the time, and then you have really peace of mind. Sometimes you may get an email telling you, we think that something weird is happening, like something tried to log in 5 times, it's weird, maybe you want to check it out, okay? Good, so don't hesitate to do that if you want. Here, I'm just going to discard. So that's what I wanted to show you here. Now, if you want to know more about securing your data, you can go to microsoft.com/learn. Here, we also had some security information in the tour. But here under Learn, you have a whole path which is about securing your cloud data. So something which can be interesting to learn more about how we secure things and how you can use your own keys, your own certificates, etc. A few resources. First of all, everything migration, you start at azure.com/migration or azure.com/migrate. It's the same. We have guidance, tools, and partners, not just for database, but for everything you want to migrate, VMs, application services, etc. And you can also go to Learn to keep your skills up to date, like I mentioned a few times. You can build a case for your CEO or CFO, and you can go here to azure.com/TCO, that's the total cost of ownership, and you can start by evaluating how much your cloud offering is going to cost you. Like you say, okay, I will need this database with so many cores and so much capacity, and I will need maybe this application service. Then you do a nice report. We even let you put your own logo on the report, which is cool, because then you go to your CFO, you say, I spent 2 weeks doing that. And in fact, you spent an hour last night. So that's great. So basically, we help you build a case. It allows you to really evaluate how much it's going to cost you. And like this, you don't have surprises. It's a nice offering. Fast Track, definitely, if you want some partners, you can go and check our Fast Track offering. And then you can get in touch with Azure engineers, both from Microsoft, but also from partners. For example, we are partnering with all those very clever and nice people, either here locally in Amsterdam or really worldwide. So if you get the slides later and click on the logos, you will go directly to them. So in summary, I would say evaluate the cost using the TCO, the total cost of ownership. Find a partner if necessary. Start assessing your migration, and then you can really start the migration project. It's a good time at this point. You will find the slides as well as the source code for the whole tour at those addresses. And eventually, I see that people are still taking pictures, so I'm just going to give it a couple more seconds. I'll go back to this slide, but I would like to ask you to please evaluate the data. Now, about the room temperature, I cannot do anything about it. I'm so sorry. Okay, so talk to the organizers. But if you liked the content, or if you didn't like the content, I take constructive criticism anytime, because we are running more editions of that tour and we are going to come back also in the future. So if you liked or didn't like, please make sure to let us know. Thank you so much for your attention. And I will be, by the way, at the Meet the Expert. So if you want to check me and talk to me there, I will be available until 2 p.m. Thank you so much for your attention.